You pay your taxes, you follow the laws, you trust the system to keep you safe. And while you were doing all of that, the United States government was actively dropping live bacteria into your subway commutes and spraying pathogens over your neighborhoods. These events are preserved in the government's own records, officially acknowledged by the very agencies that executed the tests. The paper trail was declassified in a massive 2010 document dump. No primetime coverage, no breaking news alerts. It was quietly slipped into the public record while nobody was looking. The files detail over 230 separate open-air biological and chemical tests, spread across 30 major American cities over 2 decades. The military systematically used its own civilian population as a living laboratory, without ever asking for consent. To grasp how a democratic government justifies treating its citizens like lab rats, you have to look at the terror of the early Cold War. In 1947, through a classified program called Operation Paperclip, American intelligence absorbed hundreds of former Nazi scientists, along with their detailed data on biological and chemical warfare. American military planners looked at that data and reached a chilling conclusion. The Soviet Union was reading the exact same captured science. They were likely building weapons that could wipe out a city silently, invisibly, before anyone even knew an attack had started. But predicting how an airborne pathogen actually travels is mathematically complex. You cannot simulate the airflow of an entire metropolis in a laboratory. Animal testing cannot account for skyscrapers, subterranean subway grids, and shifting weather patterns. The military needed hard data on how a biological agent would spread through a real urban environment. They decided the only way to get that data was to test it on real American cities. The first major variable the military wanted to test was coastal wind. In September 1950, a Navy vessel anchored just outside the San Francisco Bay. Over 6 days, as the evening winds shifted inland, the ship pumped a fine aerosol spray of a bacteria called Serratia marcescens into the air. Looking at this map of the San Francisco Bay Area, you can see how perfectly the military tracked the bacterial cloud. As it drifted inland from the ship, it washed over the Presidio and across the entire downtown grid. 800,000 residents inhaled the bacteria over those 6 days, completely unaware. The military thought the bacteria was a harmless simulant. They were wrong. Weeks later, San Francisco General Hospital recorded a sudden, bizarre cluster of infections. One of those patients, a 75-year-old retired worker named Edward Nevin, developed a severe heart complication from the bacteria and died. When his family finally discovered the truth in declassified files decades later, they sued the government. A federal judge dismissed the case. The ruling legally cemented the position that Nevin's death was an acceptable cost of national security. With open-air coastal models validated, the military moved to a much more claustrophobic target, enclosed transit. They needed to know how fast an invisible weapon could move through a contained space packed with people. This cross-section of the New York subway reveals how simple it was to test a subterranean attack. Between 1966 and 1968, Army personnel in plain clothes walked into stations during rush hour. They carried ordinary light bulbs packed with a bacterial powder called Bacillus subtilis, dropped them directly onto the tracks, and let them shatter.
They didn't even need specialized dispersal equipment. The rush of air from the passing trains acted like a massive mechanical pump. The pressure forced the powder through the tunnel network and violently pushed it up the ventilation shafts, straight onto the city streets above. Millions of New York commuters breathed in that powder. The military then shifted their focus away from the dense coastal cities to the American heartland. A Soviet attack over the flat, open Midwest terrain could devastate the national food supply, and the Army needed to map that potential fallout. During Operation Dew in the late 1950s, military aircraft flew low-altitude night missions across a massive corridor from South Dakota to Minnesota. Under the cover of darkness, they sprayed rural farms and small towns with a fluorescent tracer compound called zinc-cadmium sulfide. The official line claimed the tracer was safe. In reality, the Army was fully aware that cadmium is a highly toxic, known carcinogen. They blanketed these rural populations with a cancer-causing chemical and simply flew away. People woke up to strange dust covering their cars and crops. Livestock got sick. Yet no one was ever warned. No health monitoring was ever offered, and the long-term spikes in local cancer rates were intentionally ignored by the state. While the Army was dusting entire cities and states, the CIA was running a parallel, highly localized operation called MK Naomi.
It was based right here, out of the Army's heavily guarded Fort Detrick facility in Maryland. CIA research focused on the engineering of lethal pathogens for covert assassination. Their goal was to develop biological agents that would trigger fatal heart attacks or organ failure, leaving zero trace in a standard autopsy. They wanted weapons that killed while looking exactly like natural causes. Partially declassified files confirm the most chilling detail. These lethal, untraceable agents were tested on human subjects without their consent. And to this day, the sections identifying who those victims were remain completely blacked out. When the sheer magnitude of these operations finally hit the public record in 2010, the reaction was deafeningly silent. Congress held no hearings, no compensation funds were established. 3 major newspapers ran the story, buried it in the back pages, and moved on. Even with decades of partial disclosures and buried committee reports, the government continues to withhold specific, high-stakes records.
They refuse to fund any long-term health studies on the affected towns, and the full inventory of the lethal agents deployed under MK Naomi remains locked behind classification walls. You might assume there are laws protecting us from this today. There are. The 1974 National Research Act requires informed consent for human subject testing, but read the fine print. It contains active national security exemptions that allow classified programs to bypass consent entirely. The legal loopholes are still wide open. The infrastructure to exploit them is still in place, which leaves us with one deeply unsettling question. If the government could turn its own people into test subjects for 20 years and legally sweep it under the rug, what proof do we have that they ever actually stopped?